And thank you all for coming today. This session is Leaders First, Building the AI Forward University through Institutional Transformation. We're going to be sharing a little bit about some of the work that we've been doing. I'll go ahead and give a quick overview. Here's the agenda that we'll kind of try and stick to. We're going to do a quick introduction of ourselves, kind of our background, talk about a couple of projects that we've been working on, and then definitely wrap up with some time for discussion and Q&A. So first, I just wanted to introduce myself. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Tawnya Means. I spent the last 18 or so years in higher ed, specifically working at the University of Florida for 10 years. Go Gators, College of Warrington College of Business. And also spent the last 8 years both at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln as an assistant dean and at the University of Illinois as an assistant dean. In all those cases, working really closely with our online programs, working with our faculty, helping them with their teaching and learning efforts as it relates to educational technology, as it related to accreditation, assurance of learning, and that kind of space. And then recently, over the last year, I've started doing a lot more of the work that I'd been doing for the last 15 years with consulting with institutions on their educational technology use, on their faculty development, and on their capabilities for now using generative AI in teaching and learning. And so kind of the work that I'm going to be talking about today is building on a lot of the things that I've been learning over these past 20 or so years and sharing with you some of the current work that I'm doing with Alex.
Great, thanks, Tawnya, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining our session. My background, I've spent 25 years in the higher education space, both on administrative roles and in dean level roles, and also at the institution level within provost positions at large R1 institutions. My focus has typically been sort of as the connector between the academic experiences and where students go beyond those experiences. And just one of the things that I think a lot about in my work is how does the learning connect to career empowerment for the students that we are entrusted to serve. So in many of those roles, I played a key spot in trying to make those connections. And as a result of that, I spent a lot of time working with industry, C-suite leaders and alumni and people that cared about what universities are doing to help close that gap between what happens in academia and what's happening out in the corporate world. And as a result of that, I've also spent a lot of time working with ed tech firms and with technology companies. So I currently serve as a principal advisor to a number of ed tech companies. And Tawnya and I are going to talk a little bit about a new venture that her and I are launching that relates very much to the theme of this conference and thinking about leadership, artificial intelligence, and higher education and how those things can work a little bit differently. So I want to land the conversation here with sort of a little bit of what brought us to this conversation and maybe what brought you into this room here. And there's all sorts of stats, there's all sorts of data, there's all sorts of insight that's out there. And clearly we're at an AI conference focused on higher education, so none of these things are probably going to be knock you on your seat types of data. But I do think it gives us a sense for, I was in a session yesterday that we were talking about when ChatGPT came into our world. And some of us might be able to remember the day where that happened, where whatever role you were playing within higher education, someone said, do you know this new thing that's out there? And now in 3.5 years, how it's really transformed every facet of what we think about and where we are going. And it's, of course, we know that that's happening within higher education and outside of higher education. So the one thing that, all of these stats you can see, but the thing that I've been thinking about a lot is that first data point on the left-hand side, which is how AI is now impacting decision-making for where students are going and how powerful that's going to become. So many of our more recent graduates were on their university campuses before AI was part of their decision criteria. Now, there is probably somebody on your campus right now that's doing a campus tour, that's engaging with a prospective student, and they're asking, or their parents are asking, what is this going to look like in 3 years or in 4 years when I graduate? How well are you equipped to be able to help me find the career and the opportunity that that person is seeking? And that answer may dictate as much as anything else moving forward where those individuals end up matriculating. So it's just an interesting part of something that I don't know that when this issue came, we're so deeply concerned about all of the implications that we're not thinking about what the input characteristic looks like on the decision-making side for prospective students.
And I think one of the things that also strikes me about this slide is the employer priority, that when we talk about what employers are expecting, we recognize that a lot of them are saying, we need our students, we need your students, we need the graduates who are coming to us to have skills in AI, but then they're not really sure what that skill should be either. And so with us trying to figure it out in the classroom and with them trying to figure it out in the workplace, there's still not a lot of back and forth between industry and educational institutions to be able to define what it is those skills are and then how to develop them. And so I think that's one of the greatest challenges, is recognizing that there's a space here that's moving so quickly and changing so fast that I heard a passing comment from someone the other day or earlier today, and they said, we moved really fast. And somebody else said, well, how fast was that? 9 months. And it's like, well, 9 months, we've gone through 6 different iterations of a tool. So we can't move that quickly / slowly. And we haven't clearly defined what it is we're trying to do on either side. So I think that's a big challenge. So one of the things that struck me about almost a year and a half ago now is that I read a stat from GMAC, the Graduate Management Admissions Council, that said 87% of business schools are using AI in their educational operations and teaching. And that was it. They then moved on. And I thought, 87% are doing what? They're using it, they're teaching it, what? And so I have a lot of connections from the past 15 years of doing consulting and a lot of work that I've gone at conferences and presentations. And so I started reaching out to my colleagues and my peers and saying, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? And as I asked that question, I started to collect these stories of different business schools and what they were doing. And so put it together into a report that came out in July. It was kind of more like a white paper, but it had 26 business schools and what they were doing. And I developed some analysis of those practices that talked about their programs and talked about their courses. It talked about their institutional initiatives and all those kinds of things. So with 26 schools, I thought, here, it's great to put out this report. And I shared it with a lot of people, and they said, oh, well, we want to be in that report. I'm like, well, okay, every 6 months I could put out a report. So in October, I started collecting information for a January report, which this is the result of that. So 48 business schools participated in this report. And if you use the QR code, you can jump to the website where you can download the report. And the report kind of consists of 2 pieces. One is all of the submissions. So one piece of it is just all 48 schools, a paragraph, which nobody seems to know what a paragraph means anymore, like really long paragraphs, but essentially a paragraph of each school and what they were doing with links to their resources. And then the second piece, which is what you see on the screen here, was analysis. So looking for insights, looking at across different programs, what they were doing and kind of trying to get those trends. So I'm going to walk you through 8 themes that came out of that research, that analysis, and then we'll talk just a little bit about how that's led to what we're doing now. So basically, the report, as I mentioned before, has 48 institutions that participated in the January update. And then tomorrow, we'll actually open the submissions for the next round, which will come out in July. 8 countries around the world participated, and it was completely voluntary. So there was no paid submissions or anything like that. It's all everybody just saying, hey, we want to share what we're doing. We want to see what other people are doing. We'd love to be included. And we came up with these 8 themes across that. And really one of the key things is that across those themes, we started to recognize some consistency and convergence on practice and implications that we could provide to leaders to be able to make decisions about what they were doing in their programs. So I'll walk through each of those 8 themes. I'm going to zip through some of them, and I'm going to spend a little bit more time on a couple of others. But they're all included in the slides, and that first slide screen had the QR code to be able to download the slides, and you can look at it more carefully, or you can download the report and read the report. Or the website actually has a searchable, filterable mechanism that you can review the themes that way. So first one is around comprehensive AI ecosystems and infrastructure. Particularly the leadership implications on this is that infrastructure is your strategy made visible. And so if you have infrastructure that you're working on, then you are working toward a strategy. If your infrastructure is kind of all over the place and you don't really know what you're doing, then I would say you need to spend a lot of time focusing on that. Second one is democratization of AI education. And so this is really looking at how institutions are spreading their materials, their resources, their basically the work that they're doing, whether that's in how they're communicating in their communities, how they're educating their students, how they're opening up the doors for their faculty, their staff, their leaders. But it's basically looking at the ways in which they can help others to be able to gain that AI educational experience.
Yeah, I was going to add something quickly here, just like as the career empowerment person. That 61% figure, class of 2027, AI is affecting their career plans. How many of you are sensing that or feeling it right now with students on your campus, right? I mean, it's pretty prevalent. And I think this interesting part of democratization is that's not just in pockets of this particular major or this particular discipline or this particular college. And I think sometimes students from different parts of campus will feel locked out. And that anxiety, therefore, is going to grow significantly, where actually we believe the opposite is true, where there's sort of a little bit of a breakdown of how the valuation of a major, quote unquote, in terms of what your capabilities are. But that's happening on every single one of our campuses, whether we're feeling it or not.
Thanks for adding that, Alex. The third one is domain-specific AI applications. Now, I mentioned this as a report of AI in business education, and so some of the pieces of it are specifically related to disciplines in business, but I do see that there's a broad applicability to this across entire institutions. So while I'm talking here about marketing and analytics, finance and accounting, operations and supply chain, you can fill in any other discipline to be able to say there are things that need to be done that are very specific to how AI works in that discipline. And it is critical that we start providing not only generic and broad types of education about AI, but how does AI actually work with your discipline? Because that is where we'll develop student expertise that they can then go out and use in their workplaces. And having faculty champions of every discipline who are involved in this process is one of the critical points for success in this space. So I mentioned I was going to breeze through some of them and then spend a little bit more time on some. This is one of the ones I really want to spend a lot more time on. Not only because faculty development has been so critical to everything that I've been doing for the last 20 years, but because it really is one of the critical success factors as we looked across all of these schools. The schools that are doing good things with faculty development are getting farther and doing more than the schools that are not. And I think one of the key things here is to recognize that an investment in your faculty in terms of their development, their understanding of AI, is an investment that needs to be made first and generously and patiently. And so there's a lot of different ways in which we can say, how can we help faculty to first of all develop confidence, capability in terms of what AI is, when it's appropriate, when it's not appropriate, how it works so that they can talk and have conversations with their students, and then actually to start using it in their teaching and learning practices as well as in their research and administrative operations.
Just really interesting, that data point from the Global AI Faculty Survey. 80% of faculty report a lack of institutional clarity on how AI can be applied to teaching. It's a pretty significant number.
And I really appreciate that you drew that out, Alex, because that is one of the things when I talk to a lot of different institutions at the administrative level, a lot of times they'll say, yeah, we're communicating out, we support our faculty, we want them to do things, we're very supportive of them going places and doing things with AI. And then you talk to the individual faculty or individual staff and they say, I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to do. I know I've been given this tool, that tool, I know I've gone to this training, but what am I supposed to actually do? And how am I supposed to actually implement this? And are they really on board? I know they say they are, but are they? And so I think that clarity is a real challenge, is how do we communicate out to the community to be able to say, this is what we see as our vision, this is what we see as a roadmap, this is what we see as essential, and this is how we're going to support you in ways that can actually have you move forward. The other thing I'll say about faculty development is in no case can you buy a platform, give everyone access, do a one-time training, and wipe your hands and walk away. It's just not going to work.
Are you sure, Tawnya?
I am absolutely
All right.
sure.
Okay, just checking.
Yes.
That would be great.
I mean, you will maybe get between 2 and maybe 15% adoption that way, but you need much more than that. And so it needs a community, it needs ongoing, it needs hands-on, it needs real examples of, hey, look what I tried in my class. Do you want to try it too? Or this isn't working for me. What do I do now? You need that ongoing community in order to have it be successful. This one's a really important one, so please don't take my zipping past it as saying it's not important. It is really important, and we saw some really good examples in the report of people who are really looking at responsible AI and ethics integration in their teaching. What I will say just quickly about this one is that if you can clearly articulate to students how AI is going to be used, how it's going to affect them, and how they can be responsible users of it, then you will be able to have a differentiator between the other schools that haven't quite figured it out yet.
And companies haven't quite articulated exactly what skills they need from early career graduates, but this one is one they know they must have. They might not be able to define it for you, but this idea that they're seeking graduates who can navigate the complexity of this new world and make the right type of decisions for all of the reasons that that's important is something that I've heard a ton from C-suite partners.
Strategic partnerships. This one is kind of interesting in that we think about strategic partnerships in a number of different ways. So strategic partnerships could be the, hey, we've got a partnership with Google or OpenAI or Claude or whatever, or Anthropic or whatever. It could be something like that, really big partnerships, but it could also just be, I've reached out to the Chamber of Commerce in my community, and we have a partnership, and we're going to start working on making sure that everyone in the community has access to our AI training tools. You know, so there's a lot of different ways in which we can think about partnerships, and those schools in the report who are doing this are starting to recognize that they can build custom solutions through these partnerships. They can have longer term positioning that they can take advantage of, and that some of the capabilities that they can accomplish with those partnerships are significantly higher than what they can do on their own. We're also seeing, and this event is an evidence of that, is that institutions are starting to partnership with each other to be able to say, hey, we're doing this, you're doing this, let's learn from each other, and let's figure it out together. This one pairs really nicely with the faculty development one. And the faculty development one is saying we need to be able to prepare our faculty to be able to use it, which is a precursor to this one, which is saying that as we start to help faculty to recognize what they can do, they start to change their pedagogical approaches in really meaningful ways. So one of the things that this piece really plays out is what is happening at the different institutions in which they are supporting this pedagogical change. Because just shifting on the edges or just changing, instead of, seriously, this happened in the very beginning when they said, well, your quiz, the students are just going to copy and paste the text into ChatGPT to get the answers. So make them all images because ChatGPT can't read images. That lasted about 2 days, and then everybody had put on all that work to make their quizzes into images, making them inaccessible, by the way, and then they had to do it all over again because the pedagogy didn't change. So now we can say, instead of having a quiz that your students can copy and paste the answer and get all that, let's start talking about how we can create custom simulations. Let's start talking about how we can have dialogue assessment. Let's start talking about the work that we've always wanted to do as an educator, but been limited by, I don't know how to build a simulation, or I don't know how to have students do this massive project that we don't really have time to do because we have a 16-week time window. Now those kinds of things can be done, and when you give faculty exposure to these tools, they start to realize some of the things they've always wanted to do, but have been limited to doing, and now can do them. All right, the last theme, and this is one we really want to focus more on, so we'll take a little bit more time here, is the leadership aspect of what happens at an institution during this time of transformation. So I think one of the things that really came out is we've got some really bold leaders at some of these institutions that are in the report, And they're doing some really amazing things and having some really powerful impact. For the schools that are not moving as quickly with their leadership, I think the main thing that I've noticed is not that it's a lack of intent, but it's a lack of understanding exactly what they're dealing with. And so some of the things that are happening in institutions where they're moving forward is they're saying we can't, the not making a choice is just as bad as making a bad choice. And so we can't not make a choice, but we also can't just jump off the ledge and see what happens. We've got to be deliberate, we've got to be strategic, and we've got to understand the landscape well enough to be able to make reasoned decisions. And so really it's aligning what choices you're making with your mission and then looking at what are the implications of that. And one of the ways in which I've been working with some institutions is doing kind of like a foresight wheel or a futures wheel, where it's like, what are the first order impact of this decision? What's the second order impact of this decision? What's the third order? And that kind of helps people to see a little bit further down the road, to be able to recognize what will happen if we make this decision versus that decision.
So I would add quickly, and this is like, my discipline is organizational leadership, so this is like my jam, but I'm going to push some of my commentary to the implementation and case study that we have. But I would argue that I think a number of universities might have had an issue with intent and pushing that off at the very beginning of this adventure that we're on, and now that's changed. And there's lots of reasons that would change. But as someone who sat in the room of these conversations with chancellors and provosts and deans, a lot of that is because they're getting incoming fire from their board, from their state governors, from their heavy-handed donors, from alums and parents. And so it's, in addition to all the things that they're hearing internally, it's forcing them to act. So now that intention is there, but it doesn't mean that the leadership capability is there to say, what does that mean and how are we going to galvanize this energy in a way that's going to move us forward in a disciplined and sophisticated way?
I think one other thing that really became clear in the report is this idea, bullet point 2 here, about coordinated institutional strategies beat heroic individual efforts every time. And I'm reading that specifically because I want to recognize that there are some really cool people doing some really cool things, but if they're on an island doing it by themselves, it's not going to spread to other people, because the idea that no one like me is trying that, I'm not going to try it. I need to see that other people like me are trying it. And then that coordinated effort, that structure that's in place, can allow me to experiment in a way that is not as dangerous to me as an individual. And so that coordinated institutional strategy, having a point person, having a person who is, or a unit that is focused on this is what we're doing, is really critical in this space. The other thing that I'll talk really briefly about with the report is, and then we'll move on, is to talk about at least with the 48 schools that are in the report right now, I don't see a specific model that is more successful than another. There are lots of different ways in which people are being successful. And I've just listed a few of the different types here to recognize that there are many ways to do this successfully, but they have certain elements that are associated with them and those are kind of the 8 themes that we talked about. So these are all examples of some of the things you can see those stories of in the report, and hopefully those can kind of spark some of the ideas of what you might want to try. So essentially, we recognized a pattern. We've kind of shared with you across all of those institutions. 90% of those institutions in that 48 schools have launched AI initiatives, but many of them don't have clear policies or coordinated strategies. They're still trying to figure that out. What we are seeing is that we've got places where faculty are just being the hero and kind of experimenting on their own. We see that IT is often disconnected from the academic mission, and that's not to say that they don't want to be a part of it, but they haven't had a practice of doing it together in the past, and so this is kind of new space for them. We're also seeing that there are pilots and pockets of innovation all over institutions without the connective tissue to bring them together into a coordinated effort. And there's a lot of sense of anxiety, urgency, fear, uncertainty, and doubt is kind of ruling the day right now. People don't really know what they should be doing because they don't have a strategic partner to help moving forward. So, as we see in this report, that kind of led me to our next initiative that Alex and I are going to talk about.
So, as the slide mentioned before, we started thinking very deeply about, well, if there's a need and there's an opportunity to fill that need, what might that look like in this particular moment? And how do we start to think about what universities and university leaders more specifically are facing when it comes to this idea of AI is on campus? There's a lot of activity that's happening. It's more likely isolated and sporadic than thoughtful and coordinated. And what might that look like if we thought about a process to help organize that in a way that could be replicated? And it was at this time that Tawnya was working with a couple of different organizations and a couple of different universities. And we both worked at the University of Florida for 10 years together. We're close colleagues, and we recognized that we were seeing the very similar things on two different sides. She was looking at it primarily from the faculty and the pedagogy and the teaching and the learning and what needs to change there. And I was looking at it from the student side. And what are those outcomes, and what are the skills, and what are the credentials, and how are we preparing, and what's the responsibility to do that? And laid on top of that was, what's the responsibility of leadership? Whether that's college leadership, whether that's university leadership, whether that's systems leadership. And we started talking very deeply about what that might look like. And the first phase of that was starting to put that in practice. So we were very fortunate enough to find tremendous partners, the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, to ask us that question. And we were invited by their provost to think about this topic specifically. So if we go to the next slide. And here's a little detail about sort of the baseline of the timing and this engagement. I think it's really important. First of all, I know that there are a few UT Knoxville staff members at this conference, and it's phenomenal that you are here and that you're leaning in to these conversations. And it has been a wonderful journey for Tawnya and I to really think about this in a live case study to say what's actually happening and what will work and what won't work. But you can see we're in the middle part of this engagement, led by the provost and led not only by the provost office, but specifically by the provost. And that was very, very clear from the moment that we really were serious about engaging in this project, that this was not checking the box. This was not I need to do this and show this to the chancellor or to the state legislature or just to put it on a website, that there was deep intentionality about we've got a lot of really interesting things happening. We know we can do more. We have to do more, and here are the reasons why. So it's just really the perfect partner to work with. And again, our idea was from the very beginning that while we're talking about AI as a specific technology and a tectonic plate shift in how we view the world, at the end of the day, what so much of us are grappling with is the leadership question. Right? And I'm sure, without asking the question, that's somewhat of a toggle switch within your organization to say what type of support, what type of influence, what type of accountability and vulnerability is there within those that are making these decisions to say game on, or let's do a task force, or let's put this on the back burner because there's other things that are a little bit easier for us to take through. So UTK was just a wonderful partner to work with, and we've just been having a tremendous time with them. So in terms of how we approach this work, one of the things that we wanted to think about very deeply was creating sort of simultaneously a framework that we could apply to any institution, either at the institution level or the college level, that was thinking seriously about creating what we have now defined as the AI forward campus or the AI forward college. But most importantly, what would that look like in a bespoke way for that particular institution? So what you're seeing here is the framework that Tawnya and I have created through this process. But the important piece of this is that the only value that this has is as a starting point for a conversation. Right? We firmly believe that to get this right, there has to be energy in each and every one of these. And of course, they build on top of one another. But what this is going to look like at each institution, even within colleges within the same institution, has to be able to flex. And that's the work that we wanted to pressure test at Tennessee and the conversations that we're having with other university leaders. But this is what that framework looks like. So in terms of the ideas of what are we hearing, right? So we have this concept, we have the idea, what does this look like in practice? The beauty of, again, the relationship that we've established with University of Tennessee has been an unbelievable amount of access to people and to conversations and to willingness to dive into not just the ideation and the opportunity, but the more difficult conversations and the things that people are thinking but maybe not saying, and creating agency and opportunity to make those conversations come to life. So some of the things that we were hearing in those conversations also have percolated to the surface as we've engaged with other university leaders. Things like, the innovation is happening, it's just not connected. And if you're feeling that, imagine what an individual faculty member is feeling, or a student is feeling, or someone who's trying to engage with your institution. Their perception of your institution as being AI forward may be dictated by who that individual person is that they are engaging with. We were really inspired, and this is something that I think we give a lot of credit to Tennessee, but also something that we've been hearing in so many of these conversations. And it goes back to the idea of maybe this would have sounded different if we were asking these questions in 2023 or 2024. But we don't believe that the faculty are unwilling, in an aggregate sense, to move in this space, right? Don't necessarily need a mandate to do that. They need the inspiration to why this is going to make a difference and the ability to own that within their own discipline and within their own pedagogy, so that there's some freedom within the frame. If you're familiar with that construct, that there's certain things that we're going to think are very important for this department, for this college, for this institution, but you've got a wide degree of flexibility and creativity to think about what that looks like internally. And then again, as we've already stated, the barrier that we are seeing and that we are hoping to help with is this idea of coordination, sophisticated coordination across a university, and what would that unlock if we were able to do that effectively?
I think one of the key things about this slide that I really want to pull out is this idea that a lot of people who are learning AI right now are doing it on their own. So they're figuring it out because they're interested, or they've been told to figure it out, but they're doing it on their own. And so that piece of coordination is going to be really essential to a broader culture of what is expected and how we can move forward. And that's the missing ingredient in many cases, is that coordinated effort, that unified mission, vision, voice that needs to be a part of everything that's happening in this space.
And I just want to quick, before we jump, I'd love to pressure test. You may not be able to see it, so I'll speak it. In that top right-hand corner, 90% of institutions have launched AI initiatives, but without clear policies or coordinated strategy. Does that feel accurate, not accurate? Would love to get a sense. It's happening, right? You know about it, but where's the galvanizing? Where's the flywheel? Where are the pieces where you're feeling the energy from other people around campus to help you self-actualize and say, I can do even more, and I can get to that next level? That's what we think is missing.
And I just want to echo also another thing that Alex said, which was we have been really impressed with the faculty and the groups that we have met with. We've met with some students, that there is an appetite for this. There is a hunger and a desire to be able to move forward and to know what they're supposed to do next. And so just wanted to reiterate that, because I do think that we're at a really critical piece of time in which everyone's pretty much open to hearing more, learning more, and doing more.
Okay, so here's just a little bit. We don't want to go too deep into the weeds, but there is a process that we are following with the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and something that we believe can be replicated, again, in a custom and bespoke way for institutions that are interested in seeing the same type of results. So it essentially follows three big phases. So phase one is very much sort of advisory, customer discovery, active listening, learning as much as we need to know about what the state of play is on that campus or within that college, and then building a custom, very thoughtful, here's this vision for the institution, and here's the roadmap with which you might want to follow. And that's phase one. And then phase two, unlike, I don't need to have a recovery program, but if you've worked with consultants and you've paid a lot of money for the slide deck and they drop it on your desk and then walk away and then you see the invoice later, that's not what we wanted to do. What we wanted to do is say, we know the challenges that you're facing. We've been in those rooms. We've been in those conversations. the deck in and of itself actually can create more anxiety, because now you've paid money for something, you know you need to have results, but who has the time and who has the opportunity to really put it in play? So for us, something that's really important is getting our uniform dirty, and then going through that process of what would this look like? What would faculty actualization look like on this campus, and how would it be unique and bespoke? What would student capability and competency training look like? What would that look like for your staff, and helping those institutions build it? And then the third phase, which we're really sort of ideating on as we go, and looking, engaging with our early partners to figure this out, is I've heard it 50 times over the last 36 hours, how fast AI is changing. So if we're here in phase one providing an answer in April of 2026, well, what happens in December of 2026? And if we're no longer in the picture, so how do we sort of think about this idea of being a continual advocate, subject matter expert, person that can help you make sense of the things that continue to change, so that again that opportunity never becomes stale.
That's great. So one of the things that we have kind of said throughout this entire presentation is this idea of leadership, and leadership is the differentiator. It is the catalyst. It is what is necessary in order to move forward. It's not necessarily which technology you adopt. It's not necessarily how much money you have. It's not necessarily what your institution type or what your students are or where you're located or any of those kinds of things. It is the leadership. And so in order to focus in on that, we have developed a firm that we're launching here right now, and it is called Advance AI. So I'll let Alex kind of talk us through a little bit of what that is.
So again, without going too deep into the percentages here, I would point you to the one in the bottom left-hand corner. And you might look at that and say 5.3% of employees more likely to feel job security when their employers invest in skills. And yes, that is most likely coming from an industry lens, not a higher education lens. But why is that any different than your faculty or your staff, and what their perception is of how an institution invests in them at this time when so much is being asked of them in ways that they're flexing muscles, they're testing muscles that they haven't before in the past? What is your obligation to give them those skills and to help them navigate through something that has a complexity that is probably going to create some level of decision paralysis without some assistance? I think the other thing that I would point to is what we're seeing a lot of is this top left-hand corner, especially on the industry side. Some of you may have seen this, where there's been so much, and forget about the Anthropics and the OpenAIs of the world, but other large organizations that are investing in AI. For many of them, they've sort of put the brakes on AI spending until they can see what the actual impact is, right? And I would argue that a lot of that piece is not from the technology itself. It's from, again, where's the leader stand? What is that point of view? What's the rallying cry of that institution or that organization to say, this is why we've made this decision, and this is how we're going to invest in it, and this is how we're going to support you through that investment, not just drop the manual of how to deliver something and then walk away, and then when it doesn't get used or it's not effective, you wonder why. So we're trying to think through what is the urgency of the moment and where we can be most helpful to our peers in the field.
And I think the other one that's kind of implied by this corner that says 74% of faculty believe Gen AI will worsen their degree value is, what is the role of higher ed in this space? I heard a question this morning, what happens if the blue collar jobs start to become more valuable and people decide that they want those kinds of jobs instead of coming to us to get educated for other kinds of jobs? That's a real place. And we're also dealing with the idea of trust in the educational institutions, and where does that fit? And how are we trying to make sure that we're going to continue to be relevant? There's a lot of places where we're seeing programs being shut down, courses and institutions merging and being reduced. And so as we start to think about what is the real role of higher ed in this new space, we need to make sure that we maintain that relevancy through adapting and adjusting.
So what is advanced AI? And Tawnya and I spent a lot of time last night sort of going through this conversation and wanting to make sure that it didn't land as a sales pitch, right? We're not a vendor. We don't have a table out in the back. Not that there's anything wrong with vendors. They do wonderful things, and please go see them. I wasn't, I'm not credited for doing that, but I do think education technology so often has a role if you let them in. But for our purpose, what we wanted to think about is how can we activate? There's and again, we're preaching to a group that's already deeply invested in the AI space, which I think is an interesting place to land this conversation. But what would activation, true institution-wide activation, look like on your campus? And what are the things that are preventing that from happening? We have 4 pillars or 4 very specific things that we're thinking about that we'll share on the next slide. And then I think for most of the most important thing I'd want to say is like this idea of human-led and AI forward. The technology is an important piece of the conversation, but that's not what we're going to lead with. We're going to lead with the human side because that we believe that not only is the analysis that we've seen and the research that's out there, but that's what we're hearing from university leaders. That's necessary at this particular moment. And we want to make sure that however you measure it, it's defined by what matters to you. So again, it's not a blueprint that someone else designed, that it's a peer institution, and then you drop it and you look at it. It's our ability to say, what is it that matters to you, and how can we deliver that?
And I think the other critical piece is to say that we're not trying to develop dependency on us. We're trying to empower the institutions we work with to be able to do this in a sustainable way moving forward long term.
So the way that I would think about, and this is a different conversation, right? But all of us are at this conference. Some of us will fly home tonight. Some of us will fly tomorrow. I'm sure that all of you in your calendars have the next 4 to 5 days cleared to be able to think deeply about what you learned at this conference, right? No? I asked Claude what that phenomenon was of like going to a conference and being excited and energized and like, I'm ready to go and run through a wall. And then you get back on the plane and you're like, oh gosh, what's going on? So the term that Claude gave me for that was the conference re-entry drag. Not bad, right? So like you go up into the atmosphere, you see everything that everyone's doing, you get excited about it, and then gravity comes in and pulls you back down, right? So we all live that reality. So for us, as we think about like, what are the ways that we can assist with that? And as we're thinking about this idea and the ways that we can support it, it really is sort of 4 individual ideas that we would ideally bring together, but any institution can pick and choose what they think is most important. But it starts with the leader, right? And it is a change management, and it is a responsibility of that leader to say, this is the moment, and this is the opportunity, and we're going to coordinate this in a way that is thoughtful and organized. And then if and when that happens, there are essentially 3 affectations, right? How do we support faculty in the classroom and with curriculum readiness? How do we support students and their capability and career readiness? And how do we support staff and their competency and capacity readiness, knowing that they're worried about this too? So often we come to these conferences and we talk about faculty and we talk about students, but there are staff on your campus right now that are freaking out about whether they're going to get riffed or what's taking place with the next budget cut. And instead of leaning in and saying, I can do more and show you how capable, they might be having the exact opposite reaction and saying, if I just don't talk to anybody about AI, maybe my job is going to be safe. And we know that that's not the right action, but that may happen.
One of the other things that we recognize is that everybody's in a different place when it comes to their institution. And so one of the things that we thought would be extremely valuable, as we mentioned a couple of slides back, is what you measure is what you're going to see. And so by being able to offer a way of measuring where you're at and what kinds of things are happening on your campus, then this concept of knowing where you are and where you want to go can lead you to having that kind of roadmap and that aspiration to be able to get to the next place. So Alex and I have done a lot of work around what this designation could look like. And Alex, you want to kind of give us a little bit of a quick glance at it?
Yeah, I think for the purpose of time, because we do want to have a little bit of time for questions, the way that I would want you to frame it is, we're not interested in ranking one versus the next. I know for all of you in the room that love rankings, you're probably super disappointed. No? As a former MBA dean, I still have scar tissue over rankings going up or down in, when those would get released and then how my day, month, year was going to go. So we don't have any interest in that business, but thank you for US News and for all those that do those things. What we want is a mechanism that we can provide the industry and stakeholders that care about us to say, here are institutions that are on a path and are on a journey to becoming stellar AI spaces for the stakeholders that they are entrusted to serve. And so what's really interesting about this is that we're going to be looking to build this in the same way that we did with the University of Tennessee through conversations and engagement with the field. This is not something that we're going to build in the, we have a very good point of view and we have a very good framework, but we want to pressure test that with leaders and identify institutions that are already really doing cool stuff or have the opportunity to say, well, we're not there yet, but we would love to in 6 months be in the spot where we are committed to an AI forward campus. And ultimately what we want to deliver here is this a signal that can be validated by your internal stakeholders and your external stakeholders that actually proves that all of this energy and time that you put in matters in a way that can be measured and can be validated. Not ranked, but measured and validated.
So as we start to roll out Advance AI, we'll kind of just walk you through what that timeline looks like for our work that we're doing at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and then what that will play into in the future. So first of all, we've already talked about, we've done kind of that discovery phase with UTK and found some really amazing things and started to work on phase 2, or phase 1 delivery, which is to share a unified vision, peer analysis, positioning, communication plans, and strategic roadmap. And we expect to have that delivered at the beginning of May. And as we do that, being able to then take that and launch it into phase 2, which is activation of that plan and helping the institution to be able to do that faculty enablement, the student readiness, the governance, the pilot programs, and et cetera. And then corresponding with that, in July, we are launching the AI Forward designation, which we are actually seeking institutions to help us, as Alex mentioned, to be able to be those founding cohort and to be able to help us to build that designation platform. So if your school is interested in participating, we would love to have you contact us and start talking to us about what that would look like. So with that, we've kind of hit you with a whole lot of things. We have about 8 minutes left to answer your questions. So we'd love to hear any questions that you have, comments that you have, maybe experiences that you've had that could help us.
So in your report, I think you mentioned 48 schools. Obviously, you probably haven't collected all the data points that would align with your AI forward designation, but I'm curious, you start to kind of informally think where those schools might be placed on that, and are there a lot toward the lower end, or are there any that are kind of at that exemplary stage?
Probably the best answer to that is the 48 schools that are in it now, in the report, voluntarily gave information without kind of a framework to measure it against. As I put out the link for people to be able to download the report, one of the things that they had the option to check the box on was, do you want to participate in the next report? Of which I have 256 schools that have said they want to be in the next report. So I imagine as we start to collect that next round, we could start to look at it to find evidence of this framework which was developed since the report came out. However, I think it's really critical that we talk specifically about what we just said about that cohort, that 15 schools cohort that we're targeting, is that we really, while we have a framework that we've kind of developed, we really want to work with those schools to be able to say, what's important to you? What do you see? How do you feel? It's kind of self-assessment as well as peer analysis.
The other thing I would say quickly to that, it's very important that we say this, and it's very important that you hear it, that because a school or an institution participates in the report has no bearing on the designation. Because an institution may or may not partner with us in Advance AI has no designation. We are responsible for the model And whatever this ends up looking like would be validated by a third party, and any institution could apply for it. Has nothing to do with, well, if you're hanging out with us, then you can be part of this designation. That's the exact opposite affectation that we would want to have. So just using our friends at UF as an example, that they're regardless of defining where they would be on that continuum, if this designation was available today, they could put in for it, and that would be measured on those metrics and those rubrics by a third party. We're just responsible for the actual designation itself. Other questions?
Does your rubric focus on universities and four-year schools, or would it be applicable to junior colleges and high schools?
So that's a great question, and I would say what institutions are going to be working with us to help us to define what it would be appropriate for that K-12 or smaller school institution. Certainly, there would be a hope that it could be as broadly applicable as possible. So if we have a K-12 school that wants to work with us in helping to build that designation, I think that's a great avenue forward.
I think the way that we're thinking about it is post-secondary, we can manage, right? So it would be, do we have a quorum within community colleges, within state colleges that would make it meaningful and valid? The number of people anecdotally that have reached out to me about K through 12, before we have a website, before people even know what's happening, like that need and that demand is there. But that's it doesn't mean that we don't have care for it, but one, that's not our natural area of expertise, and we may need to partner with others, and we may need to have our sea legs with doing this in higher education. But I think 2-year and state colleges absolutely would be something we'd be interested in doing.
Do you want to tell them about the CICU?
Yes, so we were just recently invited to participate in the CICU, the C is it consortium?
So it's council.
The Council for Independent Colleges and Universities of New York. They're partnering with Google to do an AI summit this summer, and we've been asked to present these findings and what we're doing to that group. And the leadership of CICU has asked us to produce a report specifically for those institutions. So our goal, within time permitting, is to try to get as much input from as many institutions as possible and be able to do that in a thoughtful and an organized way, because all of that insight is going to help us to be able to be better advocates and supporters of the institutions that we're working with.
So as we kind of spend the last 3 minutes wrapping up, we wanted to share some of the ways that you can engage with us. We've mentioned throughout some of the things that you can do. One is if you are interested in being part of that founding cohort, if you could reach out to us and let us know, we'd be happy to talk with you more about what your institution is doing and how you could contribute. If you are interested in advanced AI as an institution, or coming to your institution and helping you with some of the work that we've described, we're also happy to do that. We will have a website coming very soon, but it's not quite available yet. And then definitely if you're just interested in partnering with us as a thought partner, we would love to hear from you, and you can either meet with us after the session or connect with us on LinkedIn, which I'll show you the slide for that in just a second. The last thing I want to mention is an event that we're going to be hosting in June. It is called AI Convergence, and as I mentioned, a lot of the report that we've seen, there was some convergence on practice, so this is kind of a play on that, to be able to say, how can we help provosts, presidents, chancellors, deans, and their implementation partners to be able to do some of this work through transformative leadership circles, through event convenings, and through real conversations between industry professionals, academic leaders, and ed tech leaders coming together in events where they're really focusing on problem solving and creating action plans. So AI Convergence is launching this summer in June in Miami at the University of Miami, and we'd love to have you sign up to be able to come to that event as well. Contact information on our slide here, and we have 1 minute left if anybody else has another question.
I can take the last
Final words.
45 seconds, the final word. So I started in higher ed in 1997, so almost 30 years that I've been in the space. And for those of you that have been in higher ed for a little while, we've seen a lot. And there's a number of different times where our industry has been asked to think differently. This is a time unlike anything that I've ever seen, particularly as it relates to the impact on the students and as they are thinking about what comes next. So what I would want to share with you as a member of this community is, by coming to this conference, by openly thinking about what is possible, you are already doing an incredible amount of work. And to me, universities do amazing things, hard stop, but at the end of the day, there are students that are on that campus that we are entrusted to serve. And how close are we getting them to lives of purpose, lives of satisfaction, lives of impact, and how much of that is going to be different today versus 3 months versus 6 months versus 12 months. And we're just going to have to stay on top of it. But I think that those that look at that with curiosity as opposed to fear are going to be the ones that will be more personally satisfied in the work, and the impact is going to be greater. So thank you for being part of this community and everything that you do to support the students that care so much about all of these institutions that we're a part of.
Thank you very much.